Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So, tonight we're cracking open Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, everyone knows the name, right? But there's so much more to this story than just a spooky vampire tale.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Dracula is like this incredible Gothic masterpiece, but it's also this like reflection of all these Victorian anxieties.
Exactly. And we're talking big stuff here, like power, law, trauma, those things that were kind of bubbling under the surface of Victorian society.
Totally. And the way Stoker tells the story through all these like fragmented documents, letters, diary entries, even legal papers, it's brilliant. It just like sucks you right into the mystery and the suspense.
Oh, for sure. It's so cleverly done. And, speaking of legal papers, that really makes me think about the whole situation of women in Victorian society, like how they were basically trapped by all these legal constraints.
Right. Like they had very little say in anything, especially when it came to things like property or inheritance.
Exactly. It's like their whole lives were dictated by these laws that didn't really benefit them.
Totally. And that's actually super relevant to Dracula because the whole story is kind of steeped in these Victorian anxieties, especially about this idea of the new woman.
Oh, the new woman. Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was like this emerging archetype that was starting to challenge all the traditional roles of women in society.
Exactly. And like the Count, with his whole hypnotic control over women, he kind of embodies all those fears that Victorians had about female sexuality and agency, like women breaking free from those constraints.
Wow, they're so true. So you have this society that's like totally obsessed with control and order, and then you have Dracula, who's like the complete opposite, like this chaotic primal force.
Totally. He represents everything that the Victorians were trying to repress. He's like the fear of the other, the fear of the breakdown of order, and like the unleashing of all those desires that were deemed unacceptable by society.
Yeah, exactly. And the novel really doesn't shy away from exploring those like darker, more disturbing themes.
Right, like even the violence against women, even for a Victorian novel, it's pretty intense.
It is. I mean, those themes of assault and rape are really hard hitting.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult aspect of the story, but I think it's also crucial to understanding what Stoker's trying to say about societal norms, right? Like he's exposing the vulnerability of women within this patriarchal system and like how all those anxieties around purity and control could actually manifest in these horrific ways.
And it's like all of that just plays out so vividly in the characters, especially Mina and Lucy.
Yeah, totally.
They're victims trapped in this system, but they also fight back, which is so fascinating.
Exactly. Like take their vows of fidelity, for instance. They become entangled with inheritance and identity, and it's like super interesting.
Oh, totally. Like Lucy, when she succumbs to Dracula's influence, it's almost like she represents that fear of female sexuality unleashed.
Mm.
And then you have Mina, who uses her intellect and her courage to combat the Count.
Right. It's like she's demonstrating this potential for female agency, even within those constraints.
It's just like mind-blowing how Stoker weaves all these layers into the story. This whole idea of vows being tied to inheritance, it's just so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really underscores how women's lives were just completely intertwined with these legal structures that often serve to control and limit them. Like their bodies and their souls literally become battlegrounds for these larger societal forces.
Wow. So we're talking about way more than just a vampire story here. It's about power, control, and the struggle for individual autonomy.
Exactly.
And like those themes are still so relevant today, it's incredible.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just think about like all the ongoing battles for equality, the fear of the other, and the ways that we're still grappling with these really complex issues of consent and bodily autonomy.
It's like Stoker gave us this incredibly rich lens for examining these struggles, even though it was written over a century ago.
Exactly. And that's the power of great literature, right? It
Yeah.
speaks to us across time and across cultures.
So what are we left with after this deep dive into Dracula? What should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that Dracula is not just a horror story. It's a story about power, control, and the anxieties of a society grappling with change. And as you reflect on the novel, consider how those anxieties might manifest in our own contemporary society. Like, what echoes of Dracula's world do we see today? And how are we, as individuals and as a society, confronting those challenges? Those are the questions we should all be asking ourselves.
Amazing. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those very questions. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those garlic flowers handy.
Haha. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves.
See you all next time for another deep dive.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.